Hey, if you've ever thought about buying rural land and wondered how you'd actually get water out there, this episode is for you. Welcome back to the Land Buyer's Guide. I'm Scott Thomas with landparker.com, and today we're talking about drilling a well on rural property. It's one of those topics that sounds intimidating at first, but once you understand the basics, it's really not as scary as people think. So let's just dig right in. When you're buying rural land, whether you're going off-grid, building a homestead, or just want a piece of property to call your own, water is probably the most important thing you'll plan for. Out in the country, you're not hooked up to a municipal water system. There's no pipe running from the city to your faucet. You're on your own. And that's actually one of the things a lot of people love about rural land. But it does mean you need to think through your water source early on. A good well gives you clean, reliable water for drinking, cooking, irrigation, livestock, all of it. And once it's in and working well, it's just there. You don't get a water bill. You're not dependent on anyone else. That's a pretty great feeling. So where do you even start? Before any drilling happens, it's worth getting a general sense of what the ground looks like underground on your property. Some people hire a licensed hydrogeologist to do what's called a water survey or hydrogeological assessment. Basically, a professional looks at the local geology and gives you their best opinion on where water is likely to be found and roughly how deep you'd need to drill. Now, you don't always need to go that route, but it can save you money. Drilling in the wrong spot can get expensive fast, so doing a little homework up front is worth it. Here's a tip a lot of people don't know about. Well, logs. These are records from previously drilled wells, and in many areas, they're public record. So you can actually look up what depth neighboring properties drilled to and whether they found water. Your county or state geological survey often has groundwater maps too. That kind of local data is really valuable before you spend a dollar on drilling. The thing is, well, drilling is regulated, and the rules are different depending on where you are. Most states require a permit before you start drilling, so you'd want to check with your local health department or environmental agency to understand what's required in your area. There are also rules about placement. In most places, a well has to be a certain distance from a septic system, from property lines, and from buildings. Those setback requirements exist for good reason. You don't want your drinking water anywhere near a potential contamination source. And in some parts of the country, especially areas that deal with drought, there are actually limits on how much groundwater you can draw. Worth knowing before you assume you can pump as much as you want. One more thing on the regulatory side. In most states, well drilling has to be done by a licensed contractor, which is honestly a good thing. It keeps you compliant, and it means you're working with someone who knows what they're doing. Speaking of placement, where you put your well on the property matters. You want to position it away from anything that could contaminate the water. Think fuel tanks, animal pens, septic systems. If there's a natural slope, uphill from those things is better. You also have to think practically. Drilling rigs are big. They need room to get in, turn around, maneuver. So things like trees, steep slopes, and road conditions all come into play when you're deciding where to drill, and keep in mind the distance from where your house or cabin is going to be. A longer water line between the well and your home adds to the installation cost, so it's worth thinking through your overall site layout before you commit to a location. Now let's talk about types of wells, because not all wells are the same. The most common type for rural properties is a drilled well. A rotary drill rig goes deep into the earth, sometimes hundreds of feet, until it hits a reliable aquifer. These wells are cased with steel or PVC pipe. They're durable, and with basic maintenance, they can last for decades. If you're building a homestead or a permanent residence, this is almost always the way to go. Then there are dug or bored wells. These are shallower. They access water that's closer to the surface. They're cheaper to install, but they come with some trade-offs. They're more vulnerable to contamination, and they can run dry during droughts. They work fine in certain regions, but they're not the right fit everywhere. And there's something called a driven point well, basically a pointed screen pipe that gets driven into sandy or gravelly soil. These are inexpensive, but they only work in very specific geological conditions with a very shallow water table. Not common for most rural property setups. Your well driller will help you figure out what makes sense for your specific land. That local expertise is really what you're paying for. Let's talk money for a second, because that's always a big question. Drilling costs are typically charged by the foot. In a lot of areas, you're looking at somewhere between $15 and $30 per foot, sometimes more, depending on the region and what the ground is like. Hard rock takes longer to drill through them and costs more. That's just the reality. But the drilling itself is only part of the cost. You also need to factor in the casing, the pump, a pressure tank, and electrical hookups. When you add it all up, a basic drilled well with a pump and pressure system can run anywhere from $5,000 to $15,000, and sometimes more depending on depth and location. That's a wide range, I know, but it's because conditions vary so much from one place to another. Get at least 2 or 3 quotes from licensed drillers before you commit to anyone. And honestly, ask questions. A good driller will walk you through exactly what they're proposing and why. One timing thing worth mentioning: if you're financing a land purchase, some lenders won't finalize a loan until a working water source is confirmed. So if that applies to your situation, you'll want to plan accordingly and get the well done at the right point in the process. Okay, so let's say the drilling goes well, pun intended, and you hit water. That's a great moment. But the work isn't quite done yet. Water quality matters just as much as having water at all. After the well is drilled, you want to get the water tested. At a minimum, you're testing for things like bacteria, nitrates, arsenic, and pH levels. Depending on the history of the land and the region you're in, it might also be worth checking for things like heavy metals or agricultural chemicals. Use a state-certified lab for the testing. The results will be accurate and you'll have documentation you can keep on file. If something does come up in the testing, don't panic. Treatment systems like filters or UV purifiers can handle most issues pretty effectively. And once your well is up and running, it does need a little ongoing attention. Testing the water once a year is a reasonable habit for most homeowners. Check the wellhead periodically to make sure the cap is secure and everything looks intact. If you notice changes in water pressure or unusual sounds from the pump, those are worth looking into sooner rather than later. And keep records: the construction details, the depth, any service history. That stuff is useful down the road. Here's the bottom line on all of this. Drilling a well is one of those things that sounds complicated, but really comes down to good preparation and good people. Do a little research on your region's groundwater. Understand the local permitting requirements. Choose your location thoughtfully. Work with a licensed, experienced driller who knows your area's geology. It's one of the most empowering things you can do if you're serious about rural land. Once that well is in and producing clean water, you've got a foundational piece of your property squared away. Everything else builds from there. If any of this is getting you excited about owning land of your own, I'd love for you to check out landparker.com. We sell discounted rural vacant land all across the country, and we offer affordable owner financing, sometimes as low as $100 down and $100 a month. No bank, no credit check, just straightforward land ownership. Head over to landparker.com to browse available properties and learn more. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.